Morning, everyone. My name is Cynthia Valance, and I'm the Patient and Family Engagement Advisor for Sunny Hill. And it's my honor to be here as part of a team that's brought this incredible workshop together for you. Just trying to advance the slide there. Here. I would really like to start off today and this presentation in a very good way and start by doing a land acknowledgement as we are all gathered here on the traditional and unceded territories of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh people. And they have obviously been here and cared for this land since time immemorial. As we explore the impact of ableism in our healthcare system, I invite us all to reflect on the injustices that have also caused harm to our Indigenous people, and in particular, Jordan River Anderson. And may we take a few moments just to reflect on the call to action for compassion, equity, and justice in our healthcare system. Thank you. It is my pleasure to introduce Sue Robbins for today's Division of Developmental Pediatrics presentation entitled Real Talk on Ableism, Understanding Parental Experiences in Navigating Disability and Systems. Sue Robbins is a healthcare activist, speaker, and author. She's written for the New York Times, the Canadian Medical Association Journal, and the Globe and Mail. She's spoken at countless national and international health conferences about storytelling, the patient experience, and best practices in patient engagement. Her first book, Bird's Eye View, Stories of a Life Lived in Healthcare, is a poignant memoir of her experiences as a caregiver and a cancer patient. Her latest book, Ducks in a Row, Healthcare Reimagined, is a scrappy challenge to the established healthcare world. Sue has worked in paid family leadership positions with Kinsight, the Stollery Children's Hospital, and I'm proud to share Sue was the first patient and family engagement advisor for Sunny Hill at BC Children's Hospital. She is a senior partner with BirdCom, a health communications company, and she lives with her husband and youngest son, Aaron, on the Burnaby Mountain on the unceded homelands of the Coast Salish people from the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. Please join me in welcoming my friend and mentor, Sue Robbins.
Hello, everybody. Okay, I'm going to start. Did anyone have a sticker on their chair? I think there was one other one that was here around a table. I know there was a young lady over there that had one. Did one fall on the floor? Oh, okay, pick it. Okay, all right. Okay, this is my way to do my little contest that I like to start with. So I brought a couple of my books, Bird's Eye View. So in between, after we're done, come on up with your sticker, and I'm happy to sign one for you both. So thank you. Thanks for the intro, Cynthia. I just gotta make sure I got my time going so I don't go over time. Somebody will wave at me if I'm getting towards the end, I imagine. Maybe I'll put my stopwatch on. There we go. So this is a 1 hour talk for you as Sunny Hill staff. And I have to start, hang on, with my disclaimer. No, hang on, there it is. So I don't have a classic kind of conflict of interest, but I do have to say, to be transparent, that I did used to work at Sunny Hill, and that was 8 years ago. And I was the first, they called me the family coordinator, and people were like, oh, you got to go coordinate families. And I'm like, no, that's not actually what the position is. It's more about bringing the family voice into Sunny Hill. And this was before we expanded and started thinking about family, children, and youth as well. So I was very focused on the family, and I'm going to talk about some of the lessons I learned at Sunny Hill while I was here for those 2 years, about 8 years ago. So is there anyone that was here 8 years ago? I recognize a few folks. Okay, does anyone? Oh yeah, Chris, of course. If you recognize me in any way, please come up and say hi afterwards, because it's great to see you here. Hang on, I'm going to use this. All right. Just a little bit more about me as I go on to share my experience. I actually left Sunny Hill in November, and then 2 months later, I got diagnosed with breast cancer. And it was so funny because everyone said, when you leave Sunny Hill, one door closes, another one will open, and the door that opened was cancer, which wasn't actually great. I don't think that's what they mean when they say that. So I, lucky enough, have had a patient experience at BC Cancer, and I can tell you the adult world could certainly learn from the work that you do at Sunny Hill and any pediatric work, and apply some of those lessons for sure. And I also wanted to say, you know, that I wrote a couple books after I was done my cancer treatment, and I lived through the pandemic, as you did. Lots has happened since then. And now I give workshops and talks and do consulting about patient and family engagement. I'm lucky enough, I even have a client in Australia. So there's a group in South Australia, which sounds really random, but the CEO there had read one of my books, and she wanted to start up a humanity in healthcare committee to make things better for the patients that came to her hospital. So I thought that was awesome. And the first thing that they're working on, which is a great thing to start with, is physical space. So they're looking at what their emergency department wait room experience is like and trying to improve that. And I know they're looking at the whole idea of warm blankets, which if you read my book, you'll see that's one of my terms for any kind of comfort that patients and families need. I kind of use it as my metaphor that we need more warm blankets in healthcare. So I'm here to share my parental experiences, my perspective as a mother. And I want to be very clear that I am myself not disabled. My son has an intellectual disability, and you know, you need really to talk to disabled adults, children, youth, in order to get the direct disabled experience. So I wanted to be clear about that. I also believe that mothers and fathers and families are also allowed to have our stories, as long as we don't conflate them with our children's stories, which is something that I have learned the hard way over the years. So I have my story, my son has his story. There is overlap, but they are quite different. So I'm here talking from a mom point of view. I wanted to be real about my own ableism when Aaron was first born, and why really I was immersed in grief when we first got his Down syndrome diagnosis. And I think your job as an audience is to apply what I say about Aaron and our experiences to the families that you work with here at Sunny Hill. So I know you don't necessarily have a lot of patients who have Down syndrome, but just think about applying. I think it doesn't really matter what kind of disability somebody has. Although intellectual disability, I always say, is kind of the last stance as far as discrimination. But so whatever I say about Aaron, I think can very much be applied to the children and youth that you work with here at Sunny Hill. And I've got some words straight from Aaron. He used to come with me to talks, and he used to have a slide and talk about it. But then he's actually an actor. He loves performing. So he'd love to be up here with us. But he said, Mom, you know, I don't want to do healthcare stuff anymore. I don't think he finds it that interesting, if you want the truth. He'd rather like be in a movie or something cool like that. So I have captured his words. So we will see Aaron with his permission later on. Okay, I wanted to start with a thank you. This is meant to be read as we are all here on earth to help others. What on earth the others are here for, I don't know. So this is really about thanking you for choosing healthcare to begin with. And I was thinking about all the things that I learned at Sunny Hill. I was there for a little under 2 years. I mostly learned from staff stories. We did a lot of storytelling sessions. And I didn't make as much progress as I wanted to with family engagement. So I'm really happy that you've got Cynthia that's carrying on this work for you. So I was thinking about all my lessons. So I learned about making safe spaces for staff to share their stories was as important as families having safe spaces to share stories as well. I learned it was really important for staff to have debriefing and reflective practice times, because you see really, really hard things in your job every day. I did a few fun things. I'm not sure if they're carried on, but we started up a book club where we read books with both staff and families were invited from the inpatient unit. And it was so cool to talk about the book afterwards. One of the books we read was Man in the Moon, or The Boy in the Moon by Ian Brown. It's about his disabled son. And it was neat to hear the staff's perspective of the book and the family's perspective, and we all talked about it together. So I really believe in using art and literature and stuff like that to kind of bring family and staff together. It's a cool thing to do. We started up TED Talks at lunchtime where people would come and again talk about whatever TED Talk we were speaking of, to have that conversations together. And something I did, which was kind of funny, this is in the old building, of course, but I used to put these inspirational quotes up in the bathrooms. And then every once in a while, I would go and change them all. I don't know, this gave me great joy to do that. And I had heard from some of the families that they actually went around to the different bathrooms to see what the quote was for the week. And we were, I mean, the old building had, how many folks worked in the old building? Probably the same ones who know me. Yes, it had its challenges for sure. So we tried our best, I think, to spruce it up. Another thing that we really worked on was physical space. And I'm not sure if that's an issue now that you moved into a beautiful new building. But we changed all the pictures on the wall, brought in some very child and youth friendly art, and cleaned up the kitchen. If anyone knew the kitchen in the old inpatient unit, it was kind of a disaster. So we went in there with some family volunteers and cleaned everything out and got some money from the auxiliary ladies, and went to Walmart and replaced like everything there, just to make the experience a bit better for families. So those are, I was trying to think the things I did. Doesn't sound like a lot for a year and a half, but I did a lot of talking and spoke about the family experience like I'm going to do today. And I also learned really how much you as staff deeply care about the children and youth that you take care of, and how you're exposed to really difficult situations and how it weighs on you. So I wanted to make sure this slide said thank you for the work that you do. And another disclaimer, my daughter is actually a pediatric nurse. She works at the Stollery Children's Hospital in Edmonton, but she works on the trauma unit. So she sees a lot of the kids, I think, before they go to the Glenrose, if anyone knows the Glenrose in Edmonton. So she kind of I think she sees the same sorts of kids that you do, but just earlier on in their journey. Okay, so here's my first question. Whenever you see a little magic wand, it's I'm going to ask a question, and I'm not going to make it mandatory for people to answer, but just generally, how many of you have worked with families who are angry? Be honest. Oh my gosh, it's like almost everybody. Okay. So just talking about difficult situations, which is going to be my first topic. Someone wise once taught me that often underneath anger is fear with families. And I'd like to talk a little bit more about that this morning. So we'll be talking about families in grief. I'll touch on sharing the news, whether you disclose a diagnosis yourself or you're picking up the pieces after a family has had a diagnosis or unexpected news shared with them. I have a few practical communication tips. Cynthia said, be practical. So I've got some practical things to say. And also talk about ableism, and that's what the orange turtleneck is. And it's the name of one of my chapters in my book about really what my thoughts were about somebody with Down syndrome when my son was first diagnosed. I'll talk honestly about that. Okay. First off, families in grief. Hopefully you can read this slide. This is a slide of me outside the old BC Children's. Aaron was in the hospital for, I think he had pneumonia. And I did this slide to talk about difficult families, which certainly I was a real pain in the ass. I know I was when Aaron was in the hospital, but I would actually challenge, if you have children and you had a child in the hospital, of all people, clinicians and staff who work in the hospital, you'd be even more of a pain in the ass, I think, to the staff. So I just, if I'm not sure if you can read it, but it says, I have like unwashed hair, no makeup, glasses, maybe no bra. When I put that up there, my son was terrified that I said that, but it's true. Yoga pants and slippers, because you basically sleep in your clothes when you're in the hospital. And I wrote a chapter about being a difficult mom, and I'm just going to read a little bit from it. I'm a difficult mom. I say, if your child was hospitalized, I bet you'd be a difficult mom too. There are many reasons that families can be challenging. A loss of control, fear, pain, they're grieving, information overload, feeling hopeless, cultural differences with staff leading to assumptions and miscommunication, fear of negativity affecting their child's care if they speak up. Now that's a pretty long list. Can anyone think of anything that I've missed? Anybody wants to offer anything? Yes.
Just distrust of the institution.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, right. Yeah.
You can have some relationship. You might be fighting with your partner.
Right.
And you over-resolve it.
There's other stuff going on, yes, outside of the room even, yes. Yeah.
Managing everything.
Oh, yes, okay, yeah, I was gonna mention that. That part is really important, but yeah, the bed's not like I want to complain, but are quite uncomfortable. And plus you're stressed out, and plus people come in a lot. And though I know nowadays staff is much better at being quiet when they come in, as opposed to just turning on the light at 4 a.m. to do vitals. So I know that's something that people are more aware of, but yes, definitely lack of sleep comes into play. And so I wonder, perhaps instead of labeling people as difficult families, which I've heard that I'm a difficult mom, I'd like us to think about people who are experiencing difficult situations instead. So if we kind of reframe that from a difficult family to somebody who's in a difficult situation. And there are certain practical things that make this worse. Lack of sleep, no coffee. For me, that's important. Being hungry, worry about other kids at home. As Chris said, your relationship with your partner can be quite stressed out. Concern about money and work. Compound that with the stress about their beloved child, patient, and you create a difficult situation, not a difficult family. So I suggest in this excerpt, please pause and always consider how families are feeling. And you might not be able to put yourself in their shoes. I think sometimes we expect that we can fully understand another person's experience. And I actually don't think that that's true. But you may be able to move towards a kinder understanding of their perspective. And often anger is misdirected, and sometimes it's not. People may indeed be angry at you. And a lot of it is shoot the messenger. I know that that does certainly happen at healthcare. I think I've just recently forgiven our doctor how he disclosed Aaron's Down syndrome diagnosis, and Aaron is 22 years old now. So it takes a long time. But this is a great time for self-reflection to think about why this may be, instead of dismissing and stereotyping people as difficult families. Many families in the health system are deep in the throes of grief, and of course, stuck in anger is very common in grief. Perhaps something in their experiences has triggered a traumatic response, as you said, that experience with institutions too. Patients can be reeling from a new diagnosis, in the purgatory of waiting for a diagnosis, grappling with a catastrophic incident or accident that has changed every aspect of their own lives, or not so simply, just simply be worn down. There are many reasons patients and families are crappy partners. Instead of expecting us to come to the table like you, well-dressed, of decent income, rested, educated, understanding of the lingo in the system, why not recognize where families are at? And then I end by saying, in a system that does its best to dehumanize people, including staff and patients alike, taking the time to understand patients is what makes them human again. Okay, I learned this from a grief counselor at Sunny Hill. I don't know if anyone remembers, there was a session, they brought in a grief counselor, and she said, I remember a staff member spoke up and said, well, we know what's best for the family. They said that was what they had said. And she said very gently, because she was a grief counselor, she said, your story can be different than a family story. And it's okay that they're different. It's okay that we have different stories, or we think, I wouldn't make this decision for my child, but if somebody else does, then that's like totally okay. And she gave it permission to be okay. I had another young man who goes by him, who's a trans gentleman. And he said he doesn't expect people to fully understand his experiences, but he does want to be respected. So I thought that was an interesting difference when we talk about empathy, like we're supposed to fully feel what other people feel, but like I said, I think sometimes that's actually impossible. So perhaps we can move towards respect instead. I think the key is to build trusting spaces for people to have honest conversations with you. And I'll just give a few examples of what that might look like. Dealing with feedback, complaints in a timely manner. I remember once at Sunny Hill, I gave a a talk for all the staff, and it was about the complaint patient relations people came and said, I do complaints like this because I don't really believe in complaints. I believe in feedback, right? So constructive feedback. And I remember one of the physios, I don't know if she still works here or not, came up to me afterwards and she said there was a voicemail sitting on her phone that she'd been avoiding because she knew it was a family who was angry about something that had happened. And she said after she heard my talk, she realized, no, she should probably answer it right away because I had talked about if complaints come up, they do fester if you don't get a timely response. So other things that can help, like getting to know people as people, being vulnerable to let them get to know you as a person too. And I know often professionals are really taught to hide behind professionalism and not give anything personal out. And I think healthcare is about relationships. And the more we get to know each other as humans, the better we'll be. Okay, this is a hard one. I know that you're all so busy, and I'm very grateful you're here today, but not appearing rushed, even if you are rushed when you have an interaction with a family. And I have a friend who has a kid who's got CP that actually they live in Alberta, not here, but she gave this great story. They had been waiting for years, months, might have been years to see a specialist for her son. And her son uses a wheelchair. And they went in and had their first specialist appointment. Finally, it was a 10-minute appointment, very quick, in and out. And she said the specialist stood with his hand on the door the entire time he was talking to them. And they've been waiting forever to come see him and had lots of questions, right? But just think about what that might look like, what that appears to with the hand on the door, knowing he was probably in a huge rush and thinking about his next appointment. Like, obviously, that's what was happening. She had a second appointment, her son and her, with him. And she was wise to him. This is going to sound nasty, but this is what us parents do, is we have workarounds. So when he came into the room, because she knew he would be rushing out again, she actually took her son's wheelchair and she navigated it so that it was like blocking the door. So he couldn't get out as easily because her son was sitting there. And then she had a chance to get all her questions answered. So it's a bit cheeky, but it actually worked. So thinking about how to, I'll talk about that a bit more, how to not appear rushed, even though I know you are rushed. Thinking about what is a big deal to you or to families might not be a big deal to you because you see so much day in, day out. And really, I'm going to bring up my daughter again, taking care of yourself. And this is like way beyond bubble baths or yoga classes or anything like that. Ella, I ask her, like, she sees very difficult things, the aftermath of car accidents and near drownings and spinal cord injuries and all the types of things that you see in pediatric rehab. And I asked her how she took care of herself. She's only 28. And is the case, I'm not sure if it's here too, but in Alberta, she's often the charge nurse. She's often the oldest nurse on the unit. She's 28 years old. And so I say, and now she has 2 children herself, which I think has changed the way she nurses. But I say, how do you look after yourself? And she doesn't talk about work very much, but she says, I try to make sure that if I have a friend who's on shift, that we're able to talk to each other when hard things happen. And so I would really encourage you, whether you have formal debriefs or reflective practice or not, that is so, so important, I think, to keep you going. Okay, I'm checking time now. How are we doing? Oh, only okay. All right. Okay. Okay. I have stuff as like check time. I can drop certain parts of it. So, okay. Underneath anger is fear. That's my main thing that I kind of want to say to this. So anyone who likes data, I'm not like a data person. I can say I'm a writer, so I'm a words person, but there's this great book called Compassionomics. It is a culmination of all the literature that's out there in healthcare about compassion and how it makes a difference as far as quality improvement, patient safety, efficiency even. And this particular quote is from a study from Johns Hopkins that found it takes less than 40 seconds of compassion is all you need to make a meaningful difference. And I just bring this up because I'm thinking about how busy you are and how rushed. And really, I think a lot of people worry that if they bring up a conversation, it'll open this Pandora's box. That's something that I hear a lot, and that you'll be in a 2-hour mental health session where you don't feel you're necessarily trained to do that, to talk to a family. But really what all the research says, just even, giving space, silence, repeating what someone has said as far as their concerns, it really only takes 40 seconds for folks to to feel better once they leave that particular clinic room. So it doesn't take as long. I mean, every once in a while the Pandora's box might open, but generally it doesn't take as long as one might think. And I worked at, there was do you remember Michelle, Jamie? I hope you do. Michelle, she was a psychologist who worked at, is she still around? Is she? But she's, okay, she's not here right now. So she taught me something very practical, which I use today, especially when I talk to med students. She said, instead of asking what questions do you have at the end of an appointment, which typically is what happens, oh no, she says, instead of asking, do you have any questions? Then people have to kind of feel dumb. Like if they say, yes, I have a question. She says, what questions do you have? And then she counts to 10 to wait for people to answer. And she showed me how she did this. She's so lovely, is that she just clicked on the roof of her mouth for 10 seconds. And I'm going to do this for 10 seconds. You'll see how long that takes. See, that's a long time. Like that feels like silence, but it's only 10 seconds and it does help people answer. Okay, some more practical stuff. This one's from Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. I teach this to medical students, but it's actually quite helpful because they like acronyms, I've heard. So, and it's called KIDS, and it's before you go into a person's space, whether it's a clinic room or an inpatient room, to knock, introduce yourself, describe what you're going to do, and slow down. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about slowing down when I get to Erin's slide. So not appearing rushed, even if you're rushed, and really giving people the gift of presence, I think can help deal with us difficult families. Okay, and another question for you. Have you worked with families who are picking up the pieces of a, catastrophic life event or a new diagnosis, or everyone's nodding? Okay, that's actually what you do here at Sunny Hill, isn't it? I think so, yeah. Okay, I want to talk a bit about sharing the news. And I'll draw on my experience when we heard that Erin had Down syndrome, even though it's not similar. I know it's you disclose different kind of diagnoses or news, but I think some of what I offer is the same. So, Erin, everyone wants to know, did you know prenatally? It's a question I get asked. It's like, what difference does it make? But anyways, people do get asked if we knew before Erin was born if we had Down syndrome. We did not. And oddly, he did not get diagnosed in the hospital, which is very unusual. They missed it. He was born in the middle of the night. And I don't think, although I see pictures of him now, he totally looks like he has Down syndrome, but they missed the markers, I think. And we went home very quickly. So, so a couple weeks later, he wasn't nursing properly. And I ended up back at the doctor's office, and he brought up the idea that Erin might have Down syndrome. I'd say in that moment, I actually already kind of knew, but my husband poo-pooed me. It's funny, I think that families know things before we get told things, but they're not really at the top of our consciousness yet. I'd say in the moment my doctor brought it up, the whole trajectory of our lives changed. Like that's what it felt like. We were on one path. Erin's the youngest of 5. We have lots of typically developing kids. I thought I knew how to be a mother, and he certainly threw all that out, and I had to start over again from scratch. You notice that I talk about sharing the news. I don't call it breaking bad news, because if you say breaking bad news, that's very value laden as far as language is concerned. So, it's unexpected news. It's a new prognosis. It's even new diagnostic information, any kind of news that comes into a family's radar. So, I realized with Erin, the baby I expected was not the baby I got, and this was at birth. And I know you see lots of children and youth whose lives change when they're a little bit older, but basically I had to grieve for the baby I expected in order to accept the baby I got. And I'll talk a little bit about why I was grieving so much and kind of my shame around that. But at time of diagnosis, I can remember like everything and nothing about the diagnosis. Is such a weird thing. If anybody's ever had a big health diagnosis, this is what happens. I could see the room. I don't know if I was having a trauma response or something. I could smell the room. I still remember how the doctor's office smelled like. I remember my doctor's shoes. He was wearing like these desert boots kind of things. I guess they were in style back then. These brown desert boots. I think I was looking at the floor. I was holding my baby, looking at the floor. But the number one thing I remember is he left me in the room. I think he was very uncomfortable. He was a young physician. I'm not sure he'd ever done this before. And so he left me. He might have been busy. Of course, he had to go to his next patient, but we had to wait. I waited for my husband, and then we took Aaron for the lab test, which is kind of the first thing you do with Down syndrome. But I think I was in the room for about half an hour by myself with my baby. And what I really wished is that somebody had come in the room with me. So I just want to make sure that when I'm talking about disclosing diagnosis, not just about physicians disclosing diagnosis, how the team can support families after they get diagnosis. And certainly I shouldn't have been left alone in the room, I feel anyways. I wish that somebody had come just to sit with me and hold my hand, if nothing else. So, and I kind of remember like nothing as well, which means I don't really remember what he said. I don't know if you know that old Far Side cartoon where the guy's talking to the dog. See, I'm dating myself here. But anyways, he's going, blah, 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 Ginger, the dog is named, blah, 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 Ginger. And all Ginger hears is Ginger's name. Ginger doesn't hear the rest of it. And that's what a diagnosis feels like, is the blah, blah, blah. And I have a friend whose kid had cancer, and she said the same thing, that she remembered nothing. She remembered the way the room smelled and what people were wearing, but couldn't remember the words. So that really speaks to the necessity to have follow-up, easy follow-up for people, to check their understanding of what was said, maybe to have a second appointment, because it's certainly not a one and done thing. Just some practical tips about sharing the news. Logistics matter, having a private space, again, being unrushed, making sure a support person is there if possible. I don't know why they didn't ask my husband and I to come in with Aaron if he had suspected that Aaron had Down syndrome, but I wish that he had done that. That would have been helpful. I read this one thing once, is great. Resist answering feelings with facts, just allowing feelings to be. And hard feelings, it's hard to allow hard feelings, especially if you're caregivers. You want to comfort people, you want them to feel better, but I'm going to swear a little bit here, but sometimes things are just shitty, like shitty things happen to people, and you just have to allow people to sit with that. And I think that in itself is a gift as well. Watching language, a doctor once told me the words always or never should not exist in healthcare. So being as value neutral as possible. In Down syndrome, they talk a lot about risk. They say risk of Down syndrome as well. Risk is not a value neutral word. There's not a risk of you winning the lottery, for instance. So the word chance is a much more value neutral word. I think language really matters because we do remember some of those words in our heads. So, and I would say, at the time Aaron was diagnosed, I thought it was a bad thing. I thought it was a terrible thing. But now, 22 years later, like his Down syndrome, his extra chromosome is part of who he is. And I think it took me about 12 years or so, which is a long time to get to acceptance of that. And I actually don't see his Down syndrome as a hard thing, as a bad thing. I would not take it away from him, which I know sounds kind of controversial, but it's as much of him as my green eyes and my curly hair. Right? It's really a piece of him. And if you ask Aaron, he's so funny. I wish he was here because he's a good foil for me. But anyways, he's busy doing his cool stuff. I said, do you want to be called Down syndrome man or a man with Down syndrome, since he's a man now? And he looked at me, he said, Mom, I don't have Down syndrome, he says. I am Down syndrome, he says. That's what he says, I am Down syndrome, which shows that language depends on the person, obviously, but he very much considers Down syndrome a piece of his identity, and it's not a bad thing. That's something that we've nurtured over the years. And my last piece of advice, just as far as sharing the news, is being kinder than you think is absolutely necessary. I think it's really important to be strength-based as much as possible. I know you talk about that when you do goal setting with families. And I think about hope, and people talk about false hope a lot, but I don't think hope is necessarily hope for a cure. I think it's often hope for a better day. So if we can think about hope that way. Okay, now I get to read my chapter. How am I doing for time? Okay, she says. How much time's left? Oh, okay, we're good. Okay, good, because we want to have to. Okay, so I do want to read this. So this is called, from my first book, it's called My Ego in an Orange Striped Turtleneck. And it's about stereotypes and the value of hope. So I had a friend say to me once, I start with her quote, if you're going to have a stereotype, at least make sure it's an up-to-date stereotype, she says. Don't tell me about the boy with Down syndrome you saw in church 30 years ago, which a health professional told her that when her daughter was diagnosed. So when Aaron received his Down syndrome diagnosis at 2 weeks old, I was covered in a blanket of fear. The thought of my baby having Down syndrome chilled me to the bone. There was my baby who I love, but more than anything, I did not want the Down syndrome. I did not yet know that Down syndrome is part of Aaron, like my green eyes and curly hair are part of me. Genetics run deep, but Down syndrome made me uncomfortable as hell. I had an image with a person with Down syndrome embedded in my head. It was someone with a bowl haircut, large glasses, and an orange and brown striped turtleneck. This stereotype came from memory of walking past a special education school when I was about 11. I could see the kids playing in the fenced off playground and must have caught a glimpse of a young boy with Down syndrome in the orange striped turtleneck. This stayed with me. What is especially ridiculous about this image is that the year must have been about 1979. Everybody had a bowl haircut, big glasses, and orange striped turtleneck back then. But my idea of what someone with Down syndrome looked like was frozen stereotype in time. I believe it's the responsibility of those disclosing diagnosis to have a sense of what life with the diagnosis is really like today. This goes beyond textbooks. This means talking to other patients and families and listening to their stories. A few years ago, I was in a pre-admission clinic before minor surgery. I was asking the doctor a lot of questions, wanting definitive answers. He said something that stayed with me. There's no such thing as always or never in medicine. While patients might demand that you have a crystal ball, while it might be tempting to say that you have an answer to everything, the real facts of life means nobody knows anything for sure. However, it's helpful to understand the wide range of variations in between always and never. For instance, telling people they'll never walk after they've had a spinal cord injury is mostly harmful. So is telling me that my son will always live with me. In fact, he's getting ready to move out right now, so it's not true. Who knows if either of these things will be true? Knowing and communicating a wide range of possibilities is important. Disability is where we veer off course of our carefully planned life. There must be nothing more horrifying to a doctor than a patient who cannot be cured, especially a baby. Here we wade into the territory of health professional values. Hope does not mean a cure. Hope can simply mean hope for a better day. Just because you think having a child with a disability would be a terrible thing for you, is it fair to assume that all families feel that way? And how can you be 100% positive about how you would feel at the time? True, if you had asked me when Aaron was first born, I would have said that Down syndrome was bad news. But within a few months, I started to realize that his extra chromosome was integral to him being Aaron. Just like my own genetic makeup makes me who I am. Assumptions are killers. It is best not to make them and deliver news in a value-neutral way. Allow families and patients to place their own value on the news in their own time instead. And I didn't write this part, but just a caveat. When Aaron was born, my husband was actually diagnosed, like excited, like he wasn't in grief like I was in grief. He did not have the same assumptions about somebody with Down syndrome that I did. And it was because he had a girlfriend when he was a teenager, my husband did, whose sister had Down syndrome. So he had grown up with somebody in Down syndrome, had meals with her, took her out to movies, like had a relationship with somebody who had a disability. And that's why inclusion is such an important thing, I think, particularly for health professionals before they hit school, to see kids in high school, to have relationships with people in high school. I think is so important. So you get to know people as human beings. So my husband had absolutely no grief about Aaron, and I did. And it shows who had the ableism and who didn't have the ableism. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. So there's lots of pieces. This is my own ableism, how I felt about someone with Down syndrome. Families also come with their own biases and how they feel about disabled people generally. There's health professional ableism, and systems and society are deeply ableist as well. I know that you know that if you work with families who are getting ready to go home. Okay. Aaron and I had a chance to talk to the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario, and they wrote a great article about ableism. And this is how they described it. Ableism is a normalized preference for certain abilities and a disregard or negative sentiment towards those without those abilities. And there's a great book, Esther's here, so I'm going to call her out a little bit. There's a great book called Am I Ableist that's written by medical students in Halifax. And I know you had another co-author. So Esther and Cynthia and somebody else wrote an article. Yeah, who was the other co-author? Oh, yeah, about particularly about the Am I Ableist ebook. And is this something that you've shared with staff? It's a great book. I did an early read of it for them, and the types of things they talk about, especially if you work with students or new staff, I think it's really important to share this with them if you can use it in any way in your orientation. They talk about the history of medicine in discrimination of disabled people. They have some parts about reflecting on personal values, and they also talk about the importance of language. So it's a great little ebook, I'd say, that you'd be able to use for your teaching going forward. So I wanted to make sure I mentioned that. Okay. Okay, so I said there were kind of a few things. Families, ableism. So I wonder how often families' own ableism comes into play when you're working with them, when they're angry because they're scared of disability or difference or whatever. Something has happened to their child and they're learning to live with whatever diagnosis their kid has. So like I was afraid. They know that the world is deeply ableist. They've witnessed it, whether they've thought about it much or not. I think it's something they know that is coming for them when they go home with their child. It's interesting. I'm not going to get into prenatal diagnosis because that's a very controversial issue, but I remember I got a chance to talk to genetic counselors who helped disclose prenatal diagnosis to families who had babies with Down syndrome. And I asked them, what were the parents afraid of? What did they hear when they did their counseling sessions? And what they said was the parents felt the reason that many of them went on to terminate their pregnancy was because they didn't think they could handle it. That's what they said. So whether they couldn't handle their own feelings about having a baby with Down syndrome, or they had a sense of what system and society do and the discrimination that happens out there, it's probably a whole mix-up of everything. I think families often haven't examined their own feelings about people who have disabilities. And really importantly, I'm kind of being on peer support. They haven't met other families who might be further down the road. And I think that's where the hope comes from. And certainly I used to run a peer support program where we met families who had a brand new diagnosis, and people were shocked that their kid with Down syndrome would be able to go to school, for instance. Like they had, I think what we gave them is some realism and some hope as they were going down that road. So they're really important to connect families up together, I think. Even Erin had a specialist appointment talking about professionals' ableism with a specialist. She's a dermatologist. After all this time, like Aaron's 22 and he's an actor, he can speak. Like, I don't know why she assumes he can't speak. Like, you should never assume someone can't speak. Everyone can communicate even if they don't use verbal words, right? So anyway, she came into the room, this was just a few months ago, and she spoke directly to me, like, and Aaron was sitting there like kind of waiting. It's him with his skin thing, it wasn't me. So I kept trying to redirect the questions over to him so that she would talk to him directly. But I was like, damn, I've been talking about this for 22 years. And still there are people who make, assumptions about Aaron because of the way he looks. So I think presuming competence is really, really important. There's a lot of systemic ableism. Oh my God. Okay, I'm not going to go on and on about this, but there's now still, we're from Burnaby. Actually, the school district out there is not as bad as other ones. And I won't say the name of other ones, but different school districts have different reputations about inclusion. We still have an access program in high school. There's inclusion up to high school, and then your kid gets sent to the access program, which is often in a different building. So that's not that different than I spoke about in 1979, when I was walking past a separate school. It's part of the school, but it's often in a different building. So, okay, I got a time thing. So anyways, I've struggled. Aaron's an actor. Do you think I can find an acting school that will accept him? They're all like, oh, we don't have the support. It's not a good fit. Like even in the public system, he's actually down in LA right now, which sounds kind of wild, but there's an acting school down there that accepted. We had to go to LA to find one. There's not one in Vancouver, and we have very many acting schools. That's ableism right there. I even think about stuff like booking handy darts. Like if you work with families who have to learn the handy dart system, okay, you have to phone and it's at certain times of the day and you have to book it far ahead, but not too far ahead. And you can't have recurring appointments. Like that's like BS. Like, why isn't this all online? And it's because they're working with disabled people. They just don't make it a priority. I believe that to be true. And a bit about societal ableism. I mean, Aaron's birthday invites, this is very common in our community, dried up after he was in grade 5. So about grade, he's 10 years old. He wasn't getting invited to birthday parties anymore. We had to build him his own community after that. And the number of people who cried at my front door when they heard Aaron had Down syndrome was quite significant. So, thinking about that we are kind of living in an ableist world. Okay, so I've got some quick ways to counter it. This slide is something else. I told Cynthia, you probably could have made this slide for your own daughter. I did this slide with mom, and her daughter's name is changed here, but we called her Ava. And she just put in all the different clinics that she said, all the different services, and within each of those bubbles, of course, there's a bunch of people in there too. So I often use this slide just to show people how complex families' lives are. And I think that it's probably generally dawning on families that this is what their life's going to look like once they leave Sunny Hill, or they're already immersed in this life and they come with all the stress that goes along with that. And I remember I talked to med students, Chris had me come in and talk to med students, and I said to them, I threw them a question. I said, who do you think coordinates all this? And I just waited for an answer. So one young med student put up her hand. She said, oh, the family doctor, she said. I almost started laughing. Oh yeah, okay, you guys laugh. So I didn't want to laugh at her, but I was like, no, it's the family, and it's usually the mother. And because we make less money than our counterpart, for the most part, it tends to be moms. So that's who coordinates all that, is the moms. So using, I think, diagrams is very helpful to explain as far as understanding. Okay, here's Aaron's tips for professionals. There he is. That's one of his headshots. Yeah, he's good. Aaron's good. No matter what I thought 22 years ago, he turned out just fine. Took us a long time. It was a lot of work, but he's an awesome guy. This is what he says he wants doctors to know very specifically. Socialize with me, he said. On the talk, he said, chitty chit chat, he said. He likes the chit chat. If he's wearing an Oilers t-shirt, like comment on it, right? Like that kind of thing. Actually, he works for the Canucks, so I shouldn't say that. If he's wearing a Canucks t-shirt, make sure you comment on that. But you got to like warm him up a little bit, this guy, right? Like I think everybody needs warm. He's nervous before he goes into the doctor's. I see him, he's chewing on his fingernails. So, slow down. Okay, and this isn't just for him. This is for everybody to slow down, but certainly he needs people to talk, not baby talk, but slower, not nearly as fast as I've been speaking. Respect me, he said, which I thought was an awesome thing to say. Don't use the R word, he said, which I thought was interesting. So he's never had a professional use the R word with him. But he has been called, I don't have to say what the R word is, right? You guys all know what this is. He has been called it in the playground. Actually, he was in a gymnastics place not that long ago, and a kid called him that. So anyways, the R word is like a no-no as far as he's concerned. And then I love this. This was all his own words. He said, don't judge a book by its cover. So Aaron has a certain cover, and you look at him and you might think a certain thing and something about his abilities, but all people with Down syndrome are different. So really getting to know him as a human being is the main thing. Another way to counter ableism, I believe, is creating safe spaces for families to share their stories, like you have here today for me to share my story, both at the point of care when it's just maybe the two of you in a clinic room, or organizationally. There's lots of hospitals who bring families in, at orientation, at grand rounds, professional development days. I think really sharing those stories helps with understanding, and really thinking about, do people feel safe enough to speak up, whether that's again at point of care or organization? Do they have safe spaces to share their experiences so that you can learn? And lastly, this is important, stay curious. I think this is a very important slide. This includes being curious about your own attitudes and biases and acknowledging that we all have biases, like we all do. That's the human condition. So thinking about maybe the takeaway is, do you have your own version of the orange turtleneck that I had it stuck in my head? And finally, this is my closing question. I'm going to link with the work that Cynthia is doing after this with the inpatient unit. But how do you think that ableism plays into a family experience once they leave Sunny Hill? And do you think that that's a factor at all? I'm kind of assuming it is, but maybe I can leave it up for if we have time for Q&A. We could talk about that a little bit. So how might ableism contribute to families' own stress and grief and make them more difficult? Do you think that that's something that does come into play? So I just want to make sure I say thank you. So, all right, this is healthcare in a nutshell, I think, is we come to you for help, right? So help me, help me, help me. And then afterwards, sometimes I'm going to get choked up, but sometimes we don't say thank you. So the thank you, thank you, thank you. And you probably made an impact on families' lives that you'll never, ever know about. But I know we remember those health professionals for sure who have given us compassion and kindness. So I wanted to end on that.